Hi, my name is Murray E. McGill of Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. This is my hypothesis titled A New Universe. The intent of my hypothesis is the unification of gravity, the electric, and strong forces. This will further lead to a definition of subatomic particles and its implications. Finally, how the universe first formed these denser particles. The fundamental component of this hypothesis is the definition of gravity. Instead of a constant force, I intend to redefine gravity as cancellation of electric force. If two absolutely charged particles are in close proximity to each other, those forces would nearly cancel out. So I've got a positron, an electron, and as those two particles come closer together, their effective forces become smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, if we wanted to assume that gravity is an electric force, we could do that by taking two particles, an electron and a positron, and another particle with another electron and a positron. We'll label those BA, 1 and 2. So the force of gravity is easy to calculate, and we're going to put those two particles exactly 2 meters apart, so the radius is 1, making things simple. So the force of gravity, of course, is G times the mass of first mass of the particle. In this case, it's 2 times the mass of an electron. And the second mass, again, the same thing, it's 2 times the mass of an electron. So that's the left side of the equation. On the right side of the equation, we have the electric traction of A1, again over r squared, minus the repulsion of A2 and B1 over the radius of r plus the diameter of an electron, which we're going to call E prime, this quantity squared, plus the attractive force of B2 over r plus 2 times E prime quantity squared. When you do the math, E prime comes out to 5.568 times 10 to the minus 24th meters. And this assumes that the force of gravity is constant, which it is not. Gravity would be a short pulse as these structures spun, which I'm going to call gravitational rotation. This spinning would be in 3 dimensions, like an airplane would have 3 components: yaw, pitch, and roll. This pulse, or universal heartbeat, would be in harmony with surrounding objects. Just as if you had 2 magnets spinning, over time they become synchronized, so too has the universe. The spin would be in clearly defined frequency of this constant value. It would also mean that the electron's orbit about the nucleus would also be in sync with this pulse. This would also mean the specific force would be twice that of the calculation above, as it alternated back and forth. So again, this is the average gravitational constant, but you're going to go from negative to positive, so the specific force can be 0 or 2 times the average value. Based on this hypothesis, the makeup of a neutron or proton will be entire with electrons and positrons. For a helium atom, the extra positron in each proton will be the opposite points, as indicated here. So a helium atom would be made up of a string of particles: a proton, a neutron, and a proton. Based on the assumption that these particles made up of approximately 1,840 elemental particles, electrons and positrons, and assuming the particles form a sphere, the radius of a neutron/proton would be 7.6 of this E prime factor. And of course, that's based on the area of the sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. The calculation is only approximation. We are assuming a true sphere, when in reality the nucleus contains charged particles. It's like putting ball bearings into a glass jar or a glass sphere. It's not going to take up all the space. Since you cannot have partial particles, the true radius would be 8 of this E prime value. As the unpaired positron in each of the protons is the farthest point of the force repulsion, would be the force of repulsion over 16 times E prime squared, based on the dense nucleus of 8 times E prime. Even though the cancellation force, gravity, is small at distances much greater than E prime, the specific attraction force at numbers close to E prime are very large, overcoming the repulsive force for the unpaired positrons. So even if we put these two particles together, their force would exceed the repulsive force of those two positrons. As particles collided with the nucleus, it sets off a chain reaction similar to experience with Newton's cradle. the object is absorbed, the energy transferred to the nucleus, releasing an elemental neutral particle, a paired electron and positron. If there's sufficient force, this object escapes the nucleus and continues on. If not, then oscillation continues until another collision occurs and there is sufficient energy to release this neutral particle, a photon. The nucleus would then consist of a dense core, as well as an area where these oscillating particles would occupy. The reason that a photon would appear to have little or no mass is that when it is released from the nucleus, if its spin is not in sync with the gravitational rotation, the attractive force could be at or near zero. Every time a photon would collide with another atom, the new particle release would again be unsynced with gravitational rotation. Only after long distance without a collision would the photon begin to align with the gravitational rotation. In effect, the speed of light relative to the last particle collided with. If sufficient time elapsed without a collision, then the photon would either accelerate or decelerate based on the gravitational forces as the photon's rotation approached the gravitational rotation constant. Currently, this phenomenon is being attributed to the slight slowing down of objects between the asteroid belt and Jupiter. Known as the Pioneer anomaly, this could be reinstated as a synchronization of the photons with a gravitational rotation. The photons that left the Pioneer spacecraft would have an opportunity to become in sync with the gravitational rotation and would then begin to accelerate. What would appear to be a slowing of the Pioneer spacecraft due to its decreased redshift would in reality be attributed to the change in velocity of the photons. Again, got a photon signal being sent from Pioneer spacecraft towards the Sun, which happens to be which is the Earth. It has an opportunity to accelerate as it becomes synced, and we would see a decreased redshift, and the impression is that that Pioneer spacecraft is actually slowing down, but in reality, it's the photons that are slowing down, are speeding up. If a photon were to collide with the nucleus at less than the speed of light, it would set up an oscillation of particles until another collision occurred, thereby maintaining the velocity, but shifting the frequency to a lower level. A redshift would be experienced. This could explain the apparent acceleration of distant galaxies. A photon leaves a distant galaxy, that photon has an opportunity to synchronize the gravitational rotation and begins to slow. This creates an increased redshift on Earth with the apparent acceleration of the galaxies, but in reality is the change in velocity of photons that causes this phenomenon. Again, from a distant galaxy, the photon left and it begins to achieve synchronization of gravitational rotation, slows, and then when it comes to us, we see as an increased redshift. What appears to be the galaxy accelerating away from us is in reality the change in velocity of the photon. If two photons came in close proximity to one another, the electric forces would either repel or attract one another, possibly disrupting its rotation and or trajectory. This interfered photon would then interfere with other photons that they came close to. This process would create a chain reaction or wave-like effect. This is the effect we see when using a two-slit experiment. How does all this impact the Big Bang theory? It doesn't. Imagine a point in time just after the Big Bang. All the particles would be attracted in pairs. Begin to attract in pairs. So you've got electrons and photons, electrons and positrons spread out through this area of the universe. But if the universe or at least our part of the universe had a slight imbalance of electrons and positrons, in our case slightly more electrons than positrons, this would create a pulsing of particles. In this area initially the vast majority of positrons would be paired with electrons. All non-paired electrons would be expelled outward, and then when the central area obtained a positive charge, pulled back inward. This pulsing would occur until the mass obtained a balanced neutral charge. In such a universe, a clustering would occur in one of two ways. All positrons would be matched with an electron, a cluster of elemental neutrons, or a neutron. A positron would be attached to an otherwise neutral mass, a proton, with an orbiting electron. Particles would naturally cluster in a combination of two. An electron and positron would be an elemental neutron with two poles. The next base cluster would be a cube, 4 positrons and 4 electrons. This base cube would have 8 poles, a neutrino. In summary, all matter is made of electrons and positrons. That these particles can be combined to make a number of subparticles, photons, electron and positron, neutrinos, 4 electrons and 4 positrons, quarks, a number of neutrinos combined with 2 electrons and 1 positron, or 2 positrons and 1 electron, neutrons, a large cluster of neutrinos, protons, a neutron with a positron. Theoretically, you could have other types of particles, such as a heavy electron, a neutrino with a missing positron or an additional electron. The other major point is speed of light is not constant, but rather is relative to the last particle the photon escaped from. This, of course, has monumental implications on our current model. Just a few are that time is constant and the speed of light is variable. There is no dark energy based on the earlier explanation, and that the amount of dark matter is less than currently calculated as photons do have mass. The maximum velocity is not that of light. That exceeding this velocity is not impossible but problematic. If you're trying to exceed the speed of light using particles traveling at the speed of light, the maximum speed would be less than light, of course. You could theoretically create an exact opposite oscillation to that of the gravitational rotation, creating unlimited acceleration. Why title this A New Universe? When we went from an Earth-centered to a Sun-centered model, we went from a complex ideology with many anomalies to a simple one, with a vast universe and many wonders, a great multitude of stars and galaxies. I believe that this simplified model will also lead to a greater understanding of our universe. Thank you.